All right, let's dive into today's explainer. We're looking at a really provocative idea called pluralism and the Dremel. It completely challenges how we usually think about American diversity and argues that what we call pluralism, well, it might be a powerful force for something else entirely. Wow, okay, so the source really just throws down the gauntlet with this opening line, doesn't it? It's reframing the whole conversation. It says that the friction we see between cultures isn't always about simple prejudice. Instead, it might be the work of a powerful, almost impersonal machine of assimilation. So, to really get what this argument is about, we have to start with the story we all know. You know, the official version, the American promise. This is the classic pitch for American pluralism, right? The idea that this is a place where you can come, bring your whole self, and coexist with everyone else without having to change who you are. But the text we're digging into today argues there's a huge hidden condition to that promise. This slide just lays it out perfectly. On one side, you've got the promise of true multiculturalism. But on the other, you have what the author calls the reality, hegemony plus flavor. So what in the world does that mean? Let's break down this core metaphor, because it is the key to this entire argument. And yeah, as you can see, it all starts with hamburgers and hot sauce. Okay, so here's the breakdown. The text defines hegemony plus flavor like this. Think of the dominant culture, the hegemon, as the main dish. That's the hamburger, an apple pie. That part is not up for negotiation. Now, other cultures, they're welcome, but only as flavor. You can add hot sauce, you can add some turmeric, maybe swap in a turkey patty, but the fundamental dish has to stay an American hamburger. And this is the really crucial part. According to this view, if you try to serve a completely different dish with a whole different set of rules, it's not seen as celebrating diversity. It's seen as non-compliance. And that's when you start to hear that grinding sound. Which brings us to the second big metaphor. The grinding Dremel. This is the author's image for that relentless, powerful machine of assimilation. Yeah, that quote from the source is pretty dark, I know. But it captures the point perfectly. This isn't about personal hate. It's about an impersonal force that just sands down all the sharp edges, all the differences, until everything fits the mold. It's the sound of compliance being enforced. Now, this isn't just some abstract theory. The source points to real, concrete examples of this Dremel at work throughout history. You've got the Americanization schools at Ellis Island, the immense pressure on immigrants to change their names. Even the GI Bill is framed as a tool that hammered a whole generation of diverse veterans into one single suburban American ideal. Okay, so if those were the more obvious methods back then, how does the Dremel work today? Well, this perspective argues it's gotten a lot more subtle. It's shifted from that overt pressure to something they call assimilation by sitcom. The source draws this really interesting contrast with the German model, which it describes as blunt, honest. Here are the classes you must learn to be German. The American model, on the other hand, is way softer. There are no mandatory classes. It's just this constant, subtle cultural pressure that comes through our entertainment. And the prime examples given are those huge, groundbreaking Norman Lear sitcoms from the 70s. Shows like these are framed as more than just entertainment. They're seen as a form of soft propaganda with a very, very specific message. So what was the underlying message? The source makes the case that these shows basically taught America that minorities and immigrants were funny, lovable, maybe a little quirky, but ultimately they were harmless and fit neatly inside the existing American structure. The Jeffersons, moving on up, wasn't a call to change the system. It was proof that the system worked for everyone if you just played by the rules. But according to this view, the deal has changed. The old American dream was, well, it was plausible. A house, a car, a steady job. The new dream that pop culture sells us, it's an absolutely unattainable fantasy of private jets and influencer lifestyles. The author argues that the ladder to get there has been kicked away, which makes that whole promise of assimilation feel like a cruel joke. So that leads us to a really critical question, right? What happens when the Dremel fails? What are the consequences when groups can't assimilate? Or maybe when they just won't? The source points to what it calls settlement pluralism. These are enclaves where you don't actually need to engage with the dominant culture at all. The concern raised here is that this starts to erode any kind of shared civic culture, and that risks balkanization, where society fractures into smaller, often hostile groups. And the text argues that no group has experienced the relentless pressure of this Dremel more than African Americans. For 400 years, from Jim Crow to mass incarceration, the machine has been grinding. And here's the point the source makes. You can't sand down skin color, so the friction is constant. Black culture as flavor, music, food, style, that's tolerated. But blackness asserting itself as a separate civic power, that's met with the full force of the machine. So this all leads us to the final and maybe the most challenging part of this whole argument. It really forces us to re-examine what we even mean when we use the word racism. So let's just ask the question directly, based on everything we've looked at. Is this constant grinding, this forced compliance, is it actually racism? Well, the text answer is nuanced. It says that, yes, individual hatred and bigotry exist. But what we often call racism is described here as the impersonal sound of the machine enforcing its own rules. To the person being ground down, it feels like hostility, for sure. But from the system's perspective, it's just maintaining order. So the crucial takeaway is this. American pluralism, in this view, is not true multiculturalism. It's not a collection of equal, parallel cultures existing side by side. It is a single, dominant system that allows for cultural flavor, but absolutely demands, that everyone plays by the same set of rules in the public square. That, according to the source, is the real deal. And we'll just end with the source's final, pretty chilling sentence, which basically sums up the entire argument. That grinding sound you hear when you resist, it's not a bug in the system. It's a feature. It's the sound of the machine doing its job. It's a very provocative idea to think on.